Hello, so in this video we're going to talk about negative numbers. Now, negative numbers are a very important topic in their own right, but they're even more important when it comes to algebra. In fact, I go so far as to say that when you get good with algebra, which you will, 80% of the mistakes you make will be because of negative numbers. They are a constant source of problems. They come into all different aspects of algebra and they cause people to make mistakes frequently and lose lots of marks for questions that they otherwise would have got right. So they definitely need to be looked at and they need to be understood really, really well. Even if you're doing an exam, which some of you will be, where you've got a calculator, even then, misunderstandings because of negatives can cause problems. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at negatives with adding and subtracting, negatives with multiplying and dividing, and then at the end we're going to put those two together and see how confusions can come about because people apply a rule that works fine for one kind of question and apply it in another kind of question, and that can cause all kinds of difficulties. So we're going to make a start with adding and subtracting, and I will see you in a second. So to start, let's look at this question here, minus 7 plus 2. Now it looks innocent enough, and yet that kind of simple question can actually cause a huge amount of problems. A good proportion of students seeing that question would get it wrong. And even if they didn't get it wrong in looking at it like that, if we buried that maybe again within an algebra question, people can certainly make lots and lots of very easy to understand mistakes. Okay, so let's have a think about this question and see why I think it causes confusion. First of all, I'll give you the answer. The answer to that question is minus 5. What a lot of people put as the answer to that question is minus 9. And why do they do that? Well, I think it's an understandable mistake. People look at the minus 7 plus 2 here, they see, their brain looks at this part here and says, oh, there's a 7 plus 2, that makes 9, so that's going to be minus 9. Again, let me emphasise, it's wrong, the answer is minus 5, but it's a very easy to understand mistake. I can see where that comes from. So let's think about why the answer is minus 5. And the way to introduce that, I think, is the idea of a number line. So if I've got a number line, something like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I take a really simple sum, like the sum 3 plus 2. Now I know you know the answer to that question, but let's just think about how you know the answer and what you're doing with that. When you're a little kid, you may well have had, in your junior school, you may have had a number line written on a board, or maybe on the board on the outside of the classroom, something like that. And it gets something like this, 3 plus 2. And what you're told is, this is where you start. So I'm going to start here. This sign here is the direction you're going. So plus means we're going that way. And 2 is the number of jumps that we go in that direction. So 3 plus 2, jump, jump, 3 plus 2 is 5. Now, again, I can stress, it sounds like I'm patronising, and I hope I'm not, but the important point is to emphasise that the rules that apply to negative numbers, to this kind of calculation, are just the same as rules you already know for this kind of calculation here. Just try another one. If we said something like 7 minus 1, again, that tells you where you start. The minus says we're going that way, down the number line, and the 1 tells us how many jumps, so 7 minus 1 is, as you already know of course, 6. But now let's think about this sum here, minus 7 plus 2. Well, one thing that we don't tell kids at junior school is that the number line carries on this way. Right, so we're going to go right down to minus 7 here. So we're going to start at minus 7. We're going to add 2, so again we're going that way, not down the number line, not that would be taking 2. We're adding 2, going up the number line, so minus 7 plus 2, and we end up at minus 5. So, first number tells you where you start, the second number, sorry, the sign tells you plus that way, minus that way, and the number here tells you how many jumps you're going in that direction. Right, if you give me a second, I'll just clear the board off and then we'll have a look at a few examples of that. Right, so I've got 4 questions written on the board. Let's see if we can work our way through these. So the first question here, minus 8 plus 5. So let's think about that. We're starting at minus 8, so we're starting down here, minus 8. Now, I should stress, you don't have to write out a number line every time. It's absolutely not necessary. I'm doing this here hopefully to help, but it's not necessary to write this out. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about number line. Think about, well, I'm starting here, which way am I going? If you think it through, you'll be far more likely to get it right and not fall into one of these easy to understand little traps. Right, so minus 8 plus 5, start at minus 8, we're going up the number line, but we're only going 5 jumps. We're not going to get into the positive numbers. We're going to end up minus 7, minus 6, minus 5, minus 4. So we're going to end up at minus 3. Up here like that. Okay, minus 6 plus 10. So let's think. So again, we're starting at minus 6 down here. We're adding 10. So we're going 10 that way up the number line. So not minus 16, again it's an easy mistake to understand. We're adding 10, so we are going from minus 6, we're going to go let's think, we've got 10 jumps we're going to do. Of those 10 jumps, we're going to jump up to 0, we're going to have used 6 of those, so we're going to have 4 left. And then we're going to do 4 more jumps from the 0, so we're going to end up at positive 4. So minus 6 plus 10 is positive 4. Now, it's worth thinking about both these questions for a second. If you think about this question here, imagine you had a bank account and you owed £8, and you went in and you paid £5 into the bank. Well, what would you have when you checked on your next bank statement? Well, you'd still be in debt, wouldn't you? You'd still owe the bank money, but not as much money as you owed to begin with. So you'd have a debt, minus 3. Minus 6 plus 10. Now this time, imagine we had a bank with a debt of £6. If we pay £10 in, what would we expect to see? We'd expect to see a positive bank balance. We'd expect to see we've got some money now. So again, this makes sense. Minus 6 plus 10, positive 4. Right, let's look at this one here. This time we start with a positive number, 8. We're taking 11. This doesn't tend to cause the same problems as these. I don't think there's a natural way to make a mistake in the way that there is with these two questions. But if we start at 8, we're going down the number line. Down. Well, of our 11 jumps we've got to go down, we've just used 8 of those. So we've got 3 jumps left, so 3 more jumps and we'll be down to minus 3. So 8 minus 11 is minus 3. And finally, we've got this one here, minus 7 minus 2. Well, let's think. We start at minus 7. Now we're taking 2, so we're going 2 that way, down the number line, not 2 that way. So where are we going to end up? Well, it's going to be 2 jumps, 1, 2, so we're going to end up at minus 9. Now, before we finish this section, I want to stress something with this last question. It's very, very common to hear people say, oh, but don't 2 minuses make a plus? I very frequently hear people give the answer to that as being positive 9. That's wrong. It's wrong. Well, first of all, if you owe £7 to the bank, let's say, and then you borrow £2 more, or if you owe your friend £7 and you borrow £2 more, it's not that they now owe you £9. You're still in debt. You owe more money. The more you borrow, the worse your debt situation becomes. So this does make sense, it's minus 9, but I want to think for a second about where people get that thing about, well, they've got something, 2 minuses make a plus. It's a sentence you will hear used quite often by math teachers, a minus and a minus make a plus. And you've got to be careful with it. It does apply in certain situations, it does not apply here. In this situation here, these 2 minuses don't magically cancel out to make a plus. It's not true. If you borrow and you borrow, you're further in debt. A minus and a minus make a plus in 3 very specific instances, and we're going to look at those over the course of the next few minutes. Now, I've got 4 questions on the board here, and they're all quite different, but they've got one shared characteristic, which you'll notice here, they've got 2 signs next to each other, like this. Plus, 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 minus, minus, plus, and minus, minus. Now, here's where you've got to be very, very careful, because the rule that we just saw earlier about the number line does not apply in this situation here. Again, common problem in maths, when you have one topic, negative numbers, but different kind of subsections within that, different sets of rules. It can get quite confusing. A good idea from one place can become a bad idea from another place. Right, okay, so let's have a little look what we've got here. First of all, we've got 5 plus plus 3. Now, I think the best way to think about this is every time you see lots of pluses, just think of it as one single plus. So that is just 5 plus 3. That's it. 5 plus 3 is 8. Now for the others, I could give you two different ways of thinking about this. One is I can give you a rule, and I will. I'll give you a rule. How do you do these questions? Something else though, I'll try, just have a go at trying to explain why these rules work. They're not just rules that some kind of like god of mathematics, or some mathematics devil created to turn and torture GCSE students. These are rules that, if like, they're the way the world works. But understanding the rules, seeing where they come from, can take a little bit of getting used to. So if you just want to learn rules, great, go with it. That's fine. I don't mind that at all. I will make a little attempt at trying to explain why these rules work. Right, okay, so plus minus. If I give a debt, if I hand you a bill at the end of this lesson and say, you owe me something, well, what have I just done? I haven't given you something. What I've really done is I've taken something away. So plus minus, a plus next to a minus, is just a minus. 5 minus 3, and 5 minus 3 is 2. In a very similar way, if I take a positive quantity from you, if I burgle your house and I reach in and I find your wallet and I find £20, okay, and I reach in and I grab that, I'm taking a positive quantity away, what am I doing? Well, I'm really just taking something away. So 5 minus 3, again, it becomes 2. So plus minus or minus plus, if they're next to each other, that's the important point, they're next to each other, then a plus minus, minus plus, they both mean minus. Then we have two minuses physically next to each other. Now this is what I mentioned earlier about the two minuses become a plus. If I take a debt from you, if you owe some money and I take that debt and I say I'll pay that, okay, so you go to a restaurant and I know it's 50 quid and I say I'll pay it, it's fine. What am I really doing is, well, if I agree to pay a bill for you of 50 quid, effectively I'm giving you 50 quid. So two minuses physically next to each other becomes a plus. So that becomes 5 plus 3, and 5 plus 3 is 8. So let's just write those rules down again. So plus plus just means plus. Two pluses next to each other is a plus. A plus next to a minus is a minus. A minus next to a plus is also a minus, and the one that often causes problems is two minuses physically next to each other. That becomes a plus. Now again, whether you make the effort or are worried about knowing why those rules work, or you just want to learn the rules like that, don't mind at all. The important point is that you know those rules and can apply them. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we multiply with negative numbers. Okay, so let's look at the first question here. Well, actually, the first question hasn't got any negative numbers in. 8 times 2, and 8 times 2 is 16. Next one here, 8 times minus 2. Okay, well, imagine that you owed 8 people £2 each. What would your overall position be? Well, you'd be in debt, you'd owe them money. And how much would you owe them? Well, you'd owe them £16 in total, so that would be minus 16. So, here's a rule, a plus times a minus makes a minus. Okay, let's try the next one here. Minus 8 times 2. Well, let's flip that round. If you owed 2 people £8, what would your position be? Well, it'd be the same as before. You'd owe £16. It would be minus 16. And the last one, this is the hardest explanation. And what I'm going to do in a few minutes is do a little kind of optional little extra in this video. If you want to watch that as to why it is, I'll go through why, I'll give you a way of thinking about minus times a minus. But here's the rule, a minus times a minus makes a plus. Right, so let's just have a look at this here. Well, first of all, actually, I think the very important point to emphasise then is that notice that the numbers don't change. When you're multiplying or dividing, as we'll see in a second with negative numbers, the minuses don't affect the actual number itself. 16, 16, 16, 16 all the way through. The only question you've got to ask with a multiplication or a division sum is it positive or negative? And again, the rule is if you're multiplying a plus by a plus, you get a plus. If you're multiplying a plus by a minus, you get a minus. If you're multiplying a minus by a plus, you get a minus. And if you're multiplying a minus by a minus, you get a plus. And you may also want to note that that's exactly the same rule as we saw a second ago when they're physically next to each other. So those two sets of rules are the same. Right, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to do a quick look at division, which is very easy once you know how to multiply, and then I'll do a little bit of explanation, because I have dodged it a little bit, about why a minus times a minus makes a plus, but that bit you can skip if you want to. Right, I'll see you back in a second. Okay, so I've got 4 division sums here featuring negative numbers. Let's have a look at these. The important point to emphasise, I mentioned it a second ago, is that the rule for dividing with negatives is exactly the same as multiplying with negatives. Let's just write that rule down again. Plus multiplied or divided by a plus is a plus. A plus multiplied or divided by a minus is a minus. A minus multiplied or divided by a plus is a minus. And a minus multiplied or divided by a minus is a plus. And again, as we said with multiplication, the signs don't change the numbers. So that'll be 5, 5, 5 and 5. The only question is whether these should be plus or minus. And again, if we apply the rule here, we can see what we need to do. Plus and a plus is plus, that's fine. A plus divided by a minus is a minus, that should be minus 5. A minus divided by a plus is a minus, so that's minus 5. And a minus divided by a minus makes a plus, so positive 5. So again, you're not learning a whole new rule or set of rules. If you know how to multiply with negatives, you know how to divide with negatives. Right, the next bit is optional. I just would like to spend a little bit of time. I feel I'm probably fudging the issue about why some of these things work. If you don't want to know why, that's fine. Just skip on to the next timestamp. There's a little bit of comments towards the end. But if you can bear with me for a few minutes, it'd be quite nice to just sort of see. It's not just, again, rules that someone created from on high one day. There are reasons behind these. And I think if you know them, it hopefully for most of you will help you remember them. So if you can bear with me with that, then please do. And I will see you back in a second. Now, I can remember many years ago presenting a student in a class with something like this and me explaining this thing about minus sign to minus makes a plus and giving the answer as 12. And I remember quite distinctly him saying, but that's so silly. How can a minus and a minus make a plus? How can that be? And at the time I didn't really know how to answer that. And I've sort of thought about it a lot subsequently to try and think of a way of conveying that idea that a minus times a minus makes a plus. And there's many explanations out there. There are many different ways in which you can explain it using language or using algebra, all kinds of things. What I tend to find though, if I try and show people those, they don't stick. People don't accept them, particularly the algebra route. People kind of follow the steps maybe, but they don't really believe it. So what I wanted to try and do was demonstrate something. About I guess the way that not just numbers work, but life works in a way. And I'm going to do that with the aid of my phone and with the aid of the touch on my phone. And I'm just going to pause for 1 second whilst I try and get the thing to light up. Right, okay, here we go. So, here's the thing. My torch has one torch button, okay, just up there. That's it. It doesn't have an on switch and off switch. It has a single switch that I use to press the torch to turn it on. Let's look what happens if I press that once. Here we go, and there. So what happened? Well, the torch came on. What would happen if I pressed it twice? Well, it's off. It's not more on. Yes, it doesn't turn more on when you press the push more times. It's either on or it's off. It's in one or other state. What if I press it 3 times? Well, you tell me what's going to happen. If I press the torch is currently off. If I press that torch button 3 times, what's going to happen? Well, let's try it. 1, 2, 3. It's on. You could even generalise that to a rule. If I pressed it an even number of times and it was off to begin with, then it's going to stay off. If I pressed it an odd number of times and it was off to begin with, it will go on. But the important point to emphasise then is that there are situations, I guess, not just in maths but in life, where things, if you like, flip. They're either in one state or the other. If you press it twice, it's as if you never pressed it in the first place. And I'm hoping that gives you maybe a little bit of insight. By the way, some of you look at this going, what on earth is he talking about? That's fine, okay? If it doesn't stick, don't worry. I'm trying whatever methods I can to try and convey this idea. If this one doesn't work for you, in a class I typically find some people kind of take this and go, yeah, okay, I think I see where you're going with that. Some people got no idea whatsoever. That's fine, that's okay. But hopefully for some of you watching this, that will stick and it will help you understand a little bit about, all right, okay, there are situations where when you've got 2 minuses, it's not more minus. 2 minuses, the 2 effectively cancel each other out and that becomes a plus. Right, so to finish off, we've looked now at adding and subtracting, we've looked at multiplying and dividing, we've looked at a situation where both of them are next to each other. What I want to do now is I just want to try and bring all that together a little bit, because again, the confusion that you often find in maths with negatives is not that the individual rules are that difficult, but people get mixed up between the two. So that'll be the last job for today. So we're going to finish off today by looking at 4 questions, just summarising what we've done so far. Okay, so here we go. So I've got minus 8 divided by minus 2. What do I know? Well, it's a minus divided by a minus. That's 2 minuses. That's going to be a plus. So an 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that will be positive 4. Minus 8 times minus 2. Well, I've got 2 minuses. I'm multiplying them. And as we know, a minus times a minus makes a plus. 8 times 2 is 16. That'll be positive 16. I've got 8, for this question here, 8 minus minus 2, they're physically next to each other. Well, that's going to turn into a plus, that'll be 8 plus 2, and 8 plus 2 is 10. And then finally, I've got minus 8 minus 2, and as we know, those 2 minuses magically cancel out and make a plus, so no. This is where you've got to be careful. Notice that the order of these questions is the reverse order to the order we did them in the video. So the thing that we did here, this here, was the thing we did at the start of the video. That means you're more likely to have forgotten it, or at least what's going to happen is that the rule you learn here is going to have been replaced by these rules here. And that's where you've got to be really, really careful. Let's just look at this question again. Minus 8, minus 2. Okay, so we're going to start at minus 8. Now we're going down the number line. So that's going to be minus 8, minus 9, down to minus 10. So the answer there is minus 10. It's not a situation where the 2 minuses cancel each other out. So the important point I want to emphasise is how incredibly easy it is to get mixed up between those. You've really got 2 sets of rules with negatives. You've got the rule for dividing, multiplying, and when they're next to each other, that's one rule. And you've got the rule for when you're just doing ordinary adding and subtracting, the second rule. And people frequently get those 2 mixed up. They're not too bad in isolation, but trying to learn them both at the same time is quite tricky, and trying to apply them when you're doing an algebra question, which is when this really becomes a problem, is particularly tricky. So that's the last thing I want to say today. When you're doing algebra questions especially, keep in mind all the time negative numbers. If at any point you think, I'm not completely sure of the rule there, what should I be doing? Stop doing the algebra. Go back and make sure you get the negatives, because otherwise algebra is incredibly difficult. Right, that's all for now, and I will hope to see you soon.